When steam finished on Britain's mainline railways in August 1968, many thought, oh well, that's it then. Hung up their cameras, filed away their notebooks, and consoled themselves with endless talk of a fabled strategic reserve hidden in the mountains of North Wales. What they failed to notice was that throughout Britain, and particularly in Wales itself, countless steam locos were still plying their trade at industrial sites. No surprise then that an area rich in coal remained a bastion of steam power throughout the 1970s and became the destination of countless pilgrimages. The South Wales collieries in the valleys were especially popular because there could be found an extraordinary variety of locos from almost every manufacturer of the industrial type. And many a local cafe in the remote mining communities benefited from regular visits by enthusiasts, and as with Scotland, the Welsh were quite laid back about strangers visiting their industrial sites, which is very good news for us now because we can enjoy the film gathered at the time. Here, Hunslet Austerity, number 3770 of 1952, heads through the Coondullus Valley on the line from Pontardulais to Graig Merthyr Colliery. The Principality of Wales, as it's known to the English, covers an area of 8,000 square miles, its largest towns and cities located on the border and around the coast. There used to be massive coalfields in the south, with smaller ones in the southwest, and the northeast, which is where we begin, with a look at two collieries near Wrexham. Gresford Colliery stood roughly 2 miles northeast of Wrexham town and southeast of the former Great Western Railway line linking Wrexham and Chester. Exchange sidings were reached by a south-facing junction, a short distance worked by steam. Although situated over the Welsh border, the colliery came under the National Coal Board's northwestern area, that's northwest of England. A visit in June 1972 produced these shots of Austerity Loco Gwynedd, Robert Stevenson and Hawthorne's number 7135 from 1944. 3 others were based here at the time, a rebuilt Hunslet 060 which shared the work with Gwynedd, and 2 others out of use, another Hunslet and a Hudswell Clark 060. A company called United Westminster and Wrexham Collieries Limited began sinking the shaft in 1908, with the first coal produced in 1911. 2 shafts were sunk, a Dennis Pit and Martin Pit, each 760 yards deep. The 3 seams worked at the site all produced a different grade of coal. Gwynedd shunt some battered wagons towards the main colliery buildings. The colliery added a gravity sandbox to the loco's right-hand running board, providing sanding on one side only. Perhaps not a unique arrangement, but an unusual one. Later in the day, the loco stands at the top of the colliery yard. A major explosion in the Dennis district of the mine in September 1934 resulted in the loss of 265 lives. The devastation was so great that only 11 bodies were recovered, and coal production didn't restart until January 1936, some 14 months later. Gresford was officially closed in November 1973. Gwynedd went to Walkden workshops in Manchester for overhaul, and then on to Bickershaw Colliery in Lancashire. Its frames, cylinders and boiler were later reused in the replica of the broad gauge locomotive Iron Duke, so a good part of her still exists today. We now head southwest of Wrexham to Bersham Colliery. The colliery was situated at Rostuslan, next to the Great Western Main Line between Wrexham and Shrewsbury. A parallel loop alongside the main line served as the exchange siding. Our first visit takes place in June 1972, when Shakespeare was in operation. This tiny 040 saddle tank was built in 1914 by Hawthorne Leslie in Gateshead as works number 3072. Initially it arrived on loan from a contractor in Wrexham, but was later bought by the colliery. The Bersham Coal Company sunk a pit called Blaenavon on this site in 1864, but it was left idle for 6 years until Barnes and Company reopened it after deepening the shafts to reach the main coal seams 420 yards below the surface. Coal production began in 1874. At the time of this visit, 770 miners were producing 1,100 tonnes of coal daily. And note the BR signal box in the background. The tight curves within the Bersham complex meant that only four-wheeled locos could be used on the site. Shakespeare was scrapped in November 1980. Our second visit in 1975 finds the colliery's other loco in action. Peckett 040 Hornet was built in 1937, but numbered 1935. It was one of Peckett's Greenhithe class, which had a lowered footplate and cab for working restricted loading gauges. Initially, the loco was built for the Black Park Colliery Company, whose branch to the GWR had a low bridge, hence the order for Hornet. It moved in 1951 to Western Wren Loco Shed to work the line to Ifton Colliery before arriving at Bersham in November 1968. The chimney was made while the engine was at Ifton Colliery by Reg Thomas, one of the fitting shop staff. He thought the loco needed something better than the very squat original chimney and produced the American-style stack. It used to be higher, but the local management made him cut it down in height. During this programme you'll see a number of Peckett locos. In 1880 Peckett and Sons took over the business established by Fox Walker and Company based at the Atlas Engine Works in Bristol. One of the hallmarks of their locos was the neatly riveted cabs and tanks, but sadly, to cut costs, the company introduced welding in 1955, which removed a lot of the character from locos built thereafter. Resistance to entering the diesel market led to the company's decline. It wasn't until 1954 that work began on creating the first diesel, which emerged in 1956. Having lost so much ground to their competitors, they only managed to build another 4. Peckett's final steam loco was a 3-foot gauge 060 side tank for Mozambique, which left the works in June 1958. Peckett's were taken over by Reed Crane and Hoist in October 1961. Steam was replaced at Bersham with the introduction of 2 diesels in 1980. Hornet stayed on until 1984 before being saved and can now be found under restoration at the Ribble Steam Railway in Preston Docks. It's the only example of the Greenhithe class still in existence. Bersham Colliery finally closed in December 1986. We now switch our attention to South Wales and the plethora of collieries once found there. We start north of Swansea at Pontardulais. A shed at Pontardulais provided motive power for trains to and from Graig Merthyr Colliery. The line ran south from the colliery to exchange sidings alongside the Great Western's Swansea District Line. We begin in the exchange sidings in June 1972, with Hunslet 3846 of 1956 arriving to take empties back up the line. Stored out of use in the background is Andrew Barclay No. 1073 from 1906, the original engine built for the line. The Hunslets had previously worked at Onllwyn Colliery. It's since transpired that the loco's real identity is number 3844, a mix-up resulting from an urgent requirement for a steam loco at Onllwyn. Of the 7 locos being assembled by Hunslet for the NCB, 3844 was the most advanced, so the company switched the works plates as the number 3846 was the one allocated to the Onllwyn loco. Here it is again, just north of the exchange sidings, passing the weighbridge en route to Graig Merthyr. The shed at Pontardulais stood to the west of the town and backed onto the A48 trunk road. In May 1974, Hunslet 3770 of 1952 takes a break. This one received the name Norma. With the lunch break over, the crew take the loco back to the exchange sidings. Two years later, we see the same loco passing the shed on the line from Graig Merthyr. Note that a spark arrestor has been fitted to the chimney and a chute added from the tank to the running plate to divert water leaking from the tank. Curiously, the loco has also acquired a white smoke box. On the same day, two more were on shed. RSH number 7170 of 1944 vintage, and in the background, Bagnall 2758 from the same year. Norma comes around the 90-degree curve from Pontardulais at Banky Bow and starts heading east towards Graig Merthyr in May 1974. On the right, we can briefly see the platform used to transfer workers up to the colliery, owing to its isolated position. These so-called paddy trains ran until around 1970. The same loco appears just after the station halt as it heads up the grade towards the steep Cwndulais Valley and Graig Merthyr. Bagnall 2758 nears journey's end on the 3 3/4 mile trip from the exchange sidings. The locos worked 3 trips a day to the colliery towards the end of the 1970s, usually in the morning. Another interesting feature of this line was that the rails were spiked to sleepers instead of the more usual chair method. The colliery at Graig Merthyr was opened in 1873 by the Corey brothers and was taken over firstly by the Western Merthyr Steam Coal Company and then the Graigola Merthyr Company in 1908. In 1956, 650 men produced an annual output of 230,000 tonnes, but this had fallen to 150,000 tonnes by the 1970s. Norma departs from the colliery soon afterwards with a loaded train. The austerity design conceived during the Second World War was so popular that a further 106 were built when hostilities ended. Of these, 77 went to the National Coal Board. Norma, when new, went to work at Bersham Colliery. In June 1954, the loco moved to Maesteg, but spent a year at Llanllwyn in the late 1960s before returning to Maesteg. It moved to Pontardulais in February 1973. The Bagnall follows, running light engine back to the shed. This loco was less fortunate than some and was eventually scrapped. Note the large piece of wood leaning against Norma's smoke box on this trip. Now why this should have needed moving down the valley to Pontardulais is anyone's guess. In our final shot from 1977, Norma storms up to the colliery. Graig Merthyr closed in 1978 after the seams were exhausted, but the yard at Pontardulais continued to see some steam action until 1980. Norma was preserved and is now at the Cambrian Railway Society's Washery Centre. Bagnall 2758 now serves as a roadside advertisement for the Cefn Colliery Museum, and RSH 7170 is at the Gwili Railway. When visiting Pontardulais, it was normal practice to nip over to Grove's End afterwards and the nearby Brynlliw. This colliery was situated to the south of the Swansea avoiding line, just off the branch to Gorsinon. Thomas Williams and Sons began sinking the shaft in 1903 and started production in 1905. However, the 1920s depression brought production to an end in 1925 and the pit was abandoned 2 years later. In 1954 though, the National Coal Board embarked on a £4.8 million scheme to reopen it, which it duly did in February 1960. Until the early 1970s, two locos could often be found working. On this visit in 1972, Peckett B3 Class 2114 of 1950 heads for the exchange sidings. Two others were on site at the time, one under repair, one out of use. The daily requirement fell to only one loco with the introduction of merry-go-round trains, which were propelled into the colliery straight off the main line. In the mid-1970s, a workforce of 570 was producing nearly 300,000 tonnes of anthracite each year. By the time of our next visit in April 1977, a 295-yard roadway was being driven under the river estuary to link up with Fireless Colliery. The road opened in June 1977, making the two collieries a single unit. Coal was brought to the surface via the Brynlliw shaft, which is visible in the background. Brynlliw was the last colliery in Wales to use steam locos on a daily basis, a practice which lasted until September 1981, when an English electric diesel arrived from Mountain Ash. Peckett 2114 busies itself shunting wagons around the yard. The colliery ceased production on the 27th of July 1983 and was abandoned 2 months later. This packet was saved and can now be found in rather poor condition at the Kidwelly Industrial Museum. But that isn't quite the end of the story. In the summer of 1996, the spoil tip left over from the colliery working caught fire and burned for more than 3 years. The fumes were so bad they closed the nearby M4 motorway on several occasions, and villagers in Gravesend and Warngren suffered breathing difficulties. A 6-year court battle ensued, with the High Court eventually holding the coal authority responsible, begging the question, who else was to blame? We now head east into Glamorgan to the system situated in the Lunvy Valley at Maesteg. A washery located at Maesteg serves 3 collieries, Caerw, Cognant and St John's. Locos were provided by an engine shed located south of the line to Port Talbot. The shed closed in the autumn of 1975, replaced by a new one at the washery. At the time of this visit in the wet summer of 1972, there was a daily requirement for 3 locos to be in steam. The system was noted for the performance of its fleet of austerities. This is Maureen, a rebuilt Hunslet originally number 2890 from 1943. It was rebuilt in 1962 and became number 3882 after spending its earlier life with the War Department at Longmoor. The loco is heading for Caerw. The increased mechanisation of coal mining produced a much greater quantity of small coal which needed to be washed, and this gave the NCB locos plenty of work transferring it to the central washery at Maesteg. The same day, another Hunslet austerity, Pamela, number 3840 of 1956, heads for the washery from Cognant. This loco was delivered new to Maesteg. The BR line is in the foreground. Both the austerities featured here have been saved for preservation. Maureen is at the mid-hands, where it now wishes to be known as Douglas, while Pamela retains her original identity at the Barry Island Railway. And talking of preservation, on August Make holiday in 1975, Great Western Pannier Tank 9642 was used to give rides over part of the Maesteg system towards St John's. This privately owned loco arrived from RS Hayes scrapyard in July 1968 and was restored at the railway. It was used on several occasions at Maesteg before it left in 1985 and now spends its time doing the rounds of various private railways. By this time in the 1970s, steam had been replaced by diesels on the Maesteg system. Regular workings finished in 1973, but Pamela was used as a spare loco until 1975, working the St John's line. In the mid-1970s, the 3 collieries were producing more than 500,000 tonnes of coal a year. The beginning of the end for the system came in 1977, with the closure of the colliery at Caerw. Cognant followed in 1981 and St John's in 1985, the last deep mine in the Lunvy Valley. However, the railway was still being used to clear stocks at the end of 1987, but the track had been lifted by October 1988, consigning another slice of our industrial past to the history books. We now move north to the Rhondda Valley and the town of Mardy, and a visit to the colliery there. The colliery named Mardy, without an E, was located at the end of the Tathvale Railway's Rhondda Valley branch, 1.5 miles northwest of Mardy Station. The Locket's Merthyr Company opened Mardy numbers 1 and 2 pits in 1877, on the spot where the loco shed was later built. 2 further pits opened in 1894 and 1914, located about a mile up the valley. The main attraction there was what became known as the Mardy Monster, a big OQ class Peckett, number 2150 of 1954. Delivered new to the colliery with sister Loco 2151, both were out of use by the mid-1960s, needing major repairs. But as you can see from these shots, in 1972, 2150 had been restored to action, receiving a new boiler supplied by Peckett and a cylinder taken from 2151. At this time, duties were shared with a diesel loco and XGWR pannier 9792. Besides mining its own coal, Mardy also handled coal brought in from other collieries for washing, so rail traffic could be heavy. The Monster was painted in a light blue colour, which you can just about make out under the grime. Back in 1926, the Locket's Merthyr company went out of business and the colliery closed. It was reopened in 1932 by Cwmaman Collieries, but with no further production from numbers 1 and 2 pits. 3 years later, the Powell Dyffryn Group took over the operation. In 1940, numbers 3 and 4 pits ceased production, but were kept open for maintenance only. In the mid-1950s, the National Coal Board spent £5 million on completely reconstructing the colliery, with a new surface layout and a new horizon mining system underground. Mardy produced top-quality dry steam coal, which was processed into smokeless fuel at Abercwmboi Furnacite plant. At this time, in May 1975, a workforce of 1,120 men was producing 250,000 tonnes of coal a year. Coal also came in from other collieries for washing. In October 1975, the Big Peckett was put out to grass when more diesels arrived. It was later preserved and can today be found at the Elsakar Railway Preservation Group in South Yorkshire. Mardy Colliery effectively closed in 1985 when the coal mined there was brought to the surface at Tymawr Colliery instead, although it was still used to transport men into the mine until December 1990. It officially closed in 1992. We now cross east to Vale Colliery, just to the north of Aberfan. The colliery was situated off the Taff Vale's Merthyr to Abercunnan and Treharris lines. Work on the pits began in 1869 and it was opened by Nixon's Navigation Coal Company in 1875. A second shaft was later sunk to the same 542-yard depth. A major attraction was the ex-Great Western pannier tank 9600, bought from British Railways in October 1965. At the time these shots were taken in 1972, 3 locos were working at the railway, with usually 2 in steam at any one time. 9600 works light engine back to the colliery after dropping off a load in the exchange sidings. The BR Abercunnan line can be seen in the foreground. Merthyr Vale is infamous for one of the worst disasters of modern times. On the 21st of October 1966, the colliery's spoil tip became unstable after a prolonged period of heavy rain and collapsed in an avalanche onto the town of Aberfan. 144 people were killed, 116 of them children, whose school was buried by the tip's collapse. Despite the disaster, the colliery continued to produce coal, and by the mid-1970s, 600 men were producing 257,000 tonnes of coal each year. Our visit in 1973 sees Andrew Barclay's side tank number 2340 of 1953 vintage awaiting its next turn at the shed. The loco was transferred to Merthyr Vale from Aberfan Railways in 1965. It also spent a few months in 1966 and 67 at Mardy. The third steam loco was Peckett OX3 class 2061 of 1945. This one had been rebuilt in 1962 by W.G. Bagnall, renumbered as 5169 and transferred in, having previously been at Mountain Ash. Steam working finished at Merthyr Vale in 1974 when diesels arrived. The colliery closed in August 1989. Of the locos we've seen, only the Pannier 9600 was saved and can now be found at Tysley. The Barclay and the Peckett were scrapped in 1975. Time for a quick trip south now to Unpublished and Lady Windsor Colliery. A half-mile line ran from the Cladach to Pontardulais line to the colliery. Two shafts, both 689 yards deep, were opened in 1886 and operated by Ocean and United National Collieries Limited. By the time of our visit in 1976, the sole remaining steam loco, Hunslet Austerity 3829 of 1955, was being used as a spare. But a helpful diesel crew arranged to put it out of the shed for photos. The Austerity had arrived in October 1955 from Treorchy. It was bought by preservationists and moved to the Swansea Vale Railway in 1982. The colliery closed in 1988. We continue south towards Hafodyrynys and Tymawr Colliery. This one stood next to the Taff Vale Railway's Treherbert branch, about a mile northwest of Pontypridd station. The original colliery was sunk in 1848 by Evan Hopkins, but was taken over in 1870 by the Great Western Colliery Company. Two Pecketts could be found there in the early 1970s, one of them used daily for the small amount of shunting required, the other for spare parts. On this occasion in 1972, Peckett W5 class 1676 from 1925 was in action. The loco arrived here from Lewis Merthyr during the winter of 1964-65. In 1958, the NCB invested £1.2 million in surface and underground reorganisation to merge Tymawr with Lewis Merthyr collieries. Standard gauge steam wasn't introduced here until 1960, and this loco arrived from Lewis Merthyr in 1964. Steam was replaced by diesel traction by the summer of 1974, and both the Pecketts were scrapped on site in 1976. Production ceased at Tymawr in June 1983. We now head southeast to Nantgarw for a visit to the coking plant there. This plant was situated next to the colliery and reached by sidings from the Cardiff to Treherbert branch. The colliery used narrow gauge stock, but the coking plant, opened by the National Coal Board in 1953, went for standard gauge steam. By 1972, 3 Hunslet Austerities could be found working the yards. This is number 3787 of 1953. The loco arrived here new from Hunslet. Normally, 2 would be in use daily. Curiously, ex-LNWR coal tank 58926 was trialled here for a few days in December 1954, but found unsuitable for this type of work. This is number 3767 of 1951 vintage, another arrival brand new from Hunslet. Diesels completely took over less than a year after these scenes were captured, and all three austerities had been scrapped on site by the end of 1973. The plant closed in November 1986. And now a complete change of scenery as we head for the coast and Barry. The British Petroleum plant, opened in 1946 by British Resin Products, stood inside the network of Barry Docks and Railways Company lines in the docks area. BP took over the plant in October 1967. This visit in 1977 produces the site's only loco, Andrew Barclay Fireless 2238 of 1948. Although there was no work for the loco that day, the crew were more than happy to show it off. 2238 arrived here new. The fireless locos work in much the same way as other steam locos, but instead of having a boiler, a large well-insulated reservoir is mounted on the mainframes. This is charged with steam from an external source at about 180 pounds per square inch, and the loco remains capable of working until the pressure drops to around 35 psi. As the pressure drops, the remaining hot water boils again at the lower pressure because the temperature stays fairly constant, producing extra steam for further work. Clever. One charge can last several hours, depending on how much work the loco does. A number of fireless locos were built by Andrew Barclay for use at sites where stray sparks would have proved dangerous, like here at a petrol depot for instance. Railway operations had finished here by 1987. The little fireless loco was saved and can now be found in the National Museum and Galleries of Wales collection at Nantgarw. We head east now along the coast into the county of Gwent and to the docks at Newport for a visit to the Monsanto plant. Standing off the Great Western's East Usk branch, Monsanto Chemicals Works was constructed from 1949 onwards. The plant manufactured industrial chemicals and plastics until 1977, including polychlorinated biphenyls, the much maligned and now banned PCBs which have single-handedly poisoned the planet, allegedly. With so much hazardous material being produced, a fireless loco was needed for the site, and the company bought Andrew Barclay 1966 of 1929 vintage from Reckitt and Coleman, mustard makers of Norwich, in 1949. Here in 1972, the loco is shunting recently arrived oil tankers. Rail operations ceased in 1990, but this fireless was saved too and can also be found amongst the collection at the Nantgarw Centre. Northwest now, back into Glamorgan and to Hengod and Penalta Colliery. The pit was on the west side of the former Rumney railway line, to the northwest of the town of Hengod. The Power Duffering Company began sinking shafts in 1906 for what was regarded as one of the most advanced collieries of the time. The first coal was raised in 1909. And our visit in January 1973 was to see ex-GWR pannier 7714 during an inspection by a group of preservationists who were thinking of buying it. The pannier had arrived from BR in July 1959 and worked its last train in 1972 when it became the spare to a diesel. A Hunslet austerity moved in from Bersham Colliery in September 1972 and took over the panniers' duties as spare loco, but the practice had fallen out of use by mid-1975. Diesels continued to provide motive power until the summer of 1980, when railway operations finished. The colliery finally closed in October 1991. The pannier is now at the Severn Valley Railway. Back over to Gwent now, as we head northeast to the Washery at Hafodyrynys. The Washery was built in the 1950s on the northern side of the Newport, Abergavenny and Hereford Railway's Taff Vale extension between Crumlin and Pontypool, which by the 1970s terminated at Hafodyrynys. A line to the tip over the route to Blaenavon headed off to the east, running south of the main line. Hunslet Austerity 3817 of 1954 backs away from the Washery in 1972 with a load of spoil for the tip. The original colliery fully opened in 1914 and was situated south of the line. A major redevelopment in the 1950s promised a rosy future, but major geophysical faults prevented the bulk of coal reserves from being mined, and the colliery closed in 1966. However, coal continued to come from drift mining at Turpentus and Blaenavon, and from other collieries by rail for washing. Steam finished by early 1973, when D3000 was transferred here. 3817 was scrapped on site in 1976. A Class 37 runs round after arriving from Newport and prepares to take out a return train, closely followed by its brake van. Operations finished here in 1978, perhaps on safety grounds. We move a few miles north now to Talywain. A branch ran from exchange sidings located opposite Abersucken and Talywain station on the LNWR's Brynlliw line and passed under the BR line to reach the land sale yard. Originally, the loco sheds serviced lines to Llanarch and Blaenavon collieries, as well as the Turpentus open cast disposal point. These routes had all closed by April 1970. This left only duties at the land sale yard, which were handled by Andrew Barclay 2332 of 1952, which carried the name Islwyn. The loco had arrived at Talywain in 1960 from Turpentus Colliery. Here it is in June 1972, heading out to pick up wagons at the land sale yard. A notable feature here was the bridge cum tunnel, known locally as Big Arch, over the NCB line. After passing under the BR line, the Barclay heads for the exchange sidings. workings finished here in 1974 and 2332 was scrapped on site in July 1975. To the west of Talywain was Vale and the Marine Colliery located at Coombe. Marine stood to the west of the Vale to Aberbeeg LNWR line, about 3/4 miles south of Coombe itself. Sinking of the colliery began in 1889 by the Vale Steel, Iron and Coal Company, with the first coal produced in 1893. In May 1974, Peckett B3 class 1889 of 1934, named Menelaus, was officially spare to a diesel, but with the diesel temporarily out of use, Menelaus gets to do a spot of shunting for our cameraman. The Peckett had arrived at Marine in July 1968 from Bersham Colliery. A-Class 37 heads past on the BR line with a train from the Vale Steelworks. During the 1970s, Marine was integrated with 6 Bells Colliery, but with all coal handled here at Marine. In 1982, £2.5 million was spent on a new skip winding system and coal handling plant. Menelaus was used on and off from the mid-1970s to the mid-1980s, and following its last steaming in 1985, had the distinction of being the last steam loco in NCB use, not just in Wales, but the whole of Britain. Not surprisingly, the loco was saved and is now at the Caledonian Railway in Brechin, Scotland. Marine Colliery finally closed in March 1989. Northeast of Marine stands Blaenavon Colliery and the Blaenavon railway system. Located to the north of the town, most operations centred on the Big Pit Colliery and the furnace sidings located next to the Washery on the former LNWR Eastern Valley line. Connections were made to the north on the Brynlliw to Abersucken line and at the southern end near Blaenavon low-level station. In 1972, Nora, Andrew Barclay 1680 of 1920, returns to the shed. The loco was sent new from the builder's Scottish works to Blaenavon. By the time of this visit, only 3 Barclays were based here, one of them used for spares, as only one loco was needed to shunt the washery at Big Pit and place wagons in the exchange sidings. Previously, there had also been the ironworks to shunt and the drift mines at Garn Slope and Kays Slope to work, but all of these closed in 1966. When the NCB took over the mine at nationalisation in 1947, it also acquired the railway's 6 Barclay 040s, again one of which was used for spares. Nora shunts the furnace exchange sidings. Big Pit itself was sunk in 1860 and took its name from the dimensions of the shafts, which were elliptical in shape with diameters of 18 and 13 feet. The mine changed hands a number of times over the years, and by the time of nationalisation was in the hands of the Blaenavon Company Limited. by 1970, manpower was down from the 1923 high of 1,399 to only 494. Only one seam was being worked, the Garou, which had a maximum thickness of only 30 inches. Coal winding ceased at Big Pit in 1973 after a new drift mine was cut to enable coal to be brought to the surface near the Washery. The Big Pit shaft was thereafter used only for man riding and ventilation. As with all the former Blaenavon Company locos, Nora's nameplates also included its former employer's name and running number. Nora leaves the shed in March 1975. In 1976, the loco was rebuilt with parts from classmate Toto, Andrew Barclay's 1619 of 1919, at which time the Nora plates were removed and the Toto plates put on. In late 1976, the Barclays were replaced by a diesel. However, in the 21st century, steam can still be found here, thanks to the Pontypool and Blaenavon Railway, which was started in 1980. Its base is the Furness sidings, where there is now a station. The line northwards is the steepest standard gauge preserved passenger carrying line in Britain, and the steep pull up the line ensures some spectacular starts from the locomotives. The northern terminus, Whistle Halt, stands at 1,300 feet and is the highest station in England and Wales. Plans are also in place to extend about 1.25 miles further southwards from Furness sidings to Blaenavon High Level. With the Washery in the background, a Class 37 passes under the NCB line, closely followed by Nora with a train of coal ready for dispatch. The colliery ceased production in February 1980. It now forms a major part of the Blaenavon World Heritage Site and is run as a mining museum. Both the Barclays were saved. 1680 is at the Big Pit Museum, 1619 is at Mangap's Farm Railway in Burnham on Crouch in Essex. We've saved the best till last, Mountain Ash, which means a move back into Glamorgan. Just like Waterside in the Scottish programme, Mountain Ash was the must-visit location in the South Wales area. The systems centred around the area to the east of Mountain Ash Station, in between the former Aberdare Railway and Taff Vale lines, with trains working both north to Deep Dyffryn Colliery and Furnessite Plant, and latterly south to Penrickaber. Abergorky Colliery was also home to the Mountain Ash Railway's workshop. We start at the engine shed in 1972 with Sir John, Avonside Engine Company B3 class number 1680 of 1914. Here it shunts the yard at Mountain Ash. Sir John started life in War Department ownership, based at Tidworth Camp in Hampshire. In 1929 it was repaired by the Bristol-based Avonside Engine Company before moving to Mountain Ash. In July 1961 it was sent to Aberraman Railways for 3 months. And it also spent at least 6 months in the Mountain Ash Central Workshops in the second half of 1967. Depending on diesel availability, up to 4 steam locos can be found working here on a daily basis. In fact, the non-availability of the Mountain Ash diesels became almost legendary. The shunter helpfully signals to our cameraman that they are crossing over to the sidings located opposite the engine shed on the other side of the river. The loco has now crossed the River Cunnan and goes about shunting the wagon works yard. As with all the locos we'll see at Mountain Ash, Sir John's survives today. It can be found at the Gwili Railway. On the same day, Hunslet Rebuild 3880 of 1961 was in action near the old Mountain Ash station. This loco had originally been built by Robert Stephenson and Hawthorns in 1944 as number 7139. The third loco of the day, number 1, Hudswell Clark 1885 from 1955, comes off shed to join the action. This loco had arrived at Mountain Ash from Lady Windsor Colliery in a dismantled state in July of the previous year, 1971. It was reassembled but missing a dome cover, so ran without it. Number 1 heads off south for a spot of shunting. Number 3880 again, after a break for lunch. The loco was known as Number 8, and until its 1961 rebuild was based at the War Department's Longmoor Military Railway in Hampshire. It carried the name Wren for part of its WD career. The loco had an extended stay in the Mountain Ash workshops from the summer of 1974 to the beginning of 1978. In early 79 it paid a visit to BR's Cardiff Canton depot for tyre turning. The loco survives now at the Pontypool and Blaenavon Railway. Moving on into 1975 and to the yard at Deep Dufferin. The railway's other Knight is in operation. Sagoma, Peckett OX1 class 1859 of 1932, works the yard. Job's done, Sagoma returns to Mountain Ash. Where it indulges in another spot of shunting. Sagoma spent its entire working life at Mountain Ash. In 1967 it was taken to the workshop for repair. It returned to the colliery line in March 1969 but was dumped out of use. A trip to the Walkden Central Workshops in Lancashire followed in June 1971, where it was finally repaired and returned to Mountain Ash just before Christmas of the same year. The loco continues to shunt around Mountain Ash, with the shed in the background. On the same day, number 1 heads north out of the complex with a train for the Aberramon blending site. Number 1 survives at the Fold House Caravan Park at Pilling in Lancashire, named the Pilling Pig. Another shot of the shed shows number 1 and Sagoma between duties. Later in the day, Sagoma shunts the sidings located north of Mountain Ash, about halfway to Aberramon. Note the double track in the foreground. This was the former Vale of Neath BR line, which the NCB took over in 1971 to serve the Aberramon Furnacite plant. Work done for the day, Sagoma returns to Mountain Ash. The loco can now be found on the battlefield line at Shackerstone in Leicestershire. In 1972, the line south was refurbished to a point opposite Penalta Colliery. Here, coal was transferred across the river from the colliery via a conveyor before loading. The coal was then taken north to the Furnacite plant. On this occasion in 1977, Llantarnam Abbey, Andrew Barclay 2074 of 1939, shunts at the loading site. This loco first arrived at Mountain Ash from Penalta Colliery in September 1957. 2 years later it moved to Merthyr Colliery. In 1965 it moved on once more to Aberystwyth Railways before returning to the Mountain Ash workshops in February 1970. However, it was decided to send it to the Walkden Central Workshops in Lancashire in May 1971, and it returned to work again at Mountain Ash in September of the same year. Llantarnam Abbey heads a train of coal towards Mountain Ash. Strangely, the loco returned from Lancashire with its name spelt wrongly, Llantarnam Abbey, without the R. The Barclay appears again on the southern section of the line, with another load on its 4-mile trip to Aberystwyth. After passing under the bridge, the loco then approaches the land sale yard. The same working passes the Mountain Ash loco shed. Llantarnam Abbey can be found today at the Swansea Vale Railway. Mountain Ash finally closed in May 1981, having retained steam operation into 1980. The workshop stayed open until 1985. So that's industrial steam in Wales in the 1970s. Don't miss the next instalment in our Round Britain tour. Industry of Steam, Northern England. If you've enjoyed the Welsh Industry of Steam, Volume 1 featuring Scotland is still available. Another dozen sites from the 70s for you to enjoy. If you like your entertainment a little faster sometimes, there's Carry On Clagging, Steam Edition, 90 minutes of smoke and noise, both on the main line and the private railways, in 21st century quality sound and vision. For the armchair adventurers, we have 2 volumes featuring the magic of China. Chinese Takeout explores the multitude of so-called industrial lines to the northeast of Beijing. 13 of them, in fact, in all where Britain in the 1950s glory. QJ Country is a journey along the incredible Jitong line in central Mongolia. The places, the infrastructure, a cab ride, a detailed look at Darban Locos shed, and the super impressive 210-2 QJ class that plied the route until 2005. Daily mainline steam in the 21st century. "125" is the story of Britain's high-speed train, from the prototype of the 1970s all the way through to the fairground liveries of the 21st century. The complete and utter history of the unique Class 57 in 3 different flavours: the Freightliner Locos, the Virgin Thunderbirds and the first Great Western 6s. It's all here.
Move with the times. 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 Move with the times.
For lots more details on our ever-expanding range of railway programmes, you can contact us in 3 ways. By phone, by mail, and by email. Or check out our website for all the latest news.